You hear us?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, but for some reason, our picture's not showing up. It could be my end, my camera.
On your end, you have to, there's a place where you mark start audio or start video, I think.
It's down on your bottom left if you're on a regular computer or laptop.
Okay,
There it is.
there we are. Uh-oh, what happened to
There you
you?
go.
No.
Oh, here I am.
Yeah.
Where's Kathy? Now Kathy's here.
It doesn't matter. We're here to see this.
Oh, but he wants to see you too.
Just so everybody knows, I will be muting everyone except the presenters so that there's no interfering sound while they're presenting. We will have questions at the end. That'll be a great time for that. So if you've got questions, save them until then.
Oh, it's in the back room in your sleeping room.
Okay, everybody, we're going to go ahead and start because we've got a lot of information. So tonight, we're going to talk about the Mount Auburn Road. There may not be another road in central Illinois that has more history attached to it than the Mount Auburn Road. You may know some of it, but we can certainly share with you enough about the Mount Auburn Road that you will appreciate the historical significance of it. For historical perspective, you need to know that Congress organized the Illinois Territory in 1809, and Illinois became the 21st state in 1818. For geographical perspective, the Mount Auburn Road runs from Route 48 and what's known as the Bulldog Crossing, past Weichels Road, and it proceeds west of towns like Osbernville and Mount Auburn, Bolivia, or I think what's also referred to as Bolvie, Rovie, Buckhart, to the end, which is in Rochester. You can take some side roads and you can get to Mechanicsburg and Illiopolis and Niantic, not to mention the Lincoln Homestead. The road has significant ties to Abraham Lincoln, which we will explore tonight. And there were railroad tracks, which made a major part of the growth of the Mount Auburn Road, which again, you're going to hear about tonight. So we go back and we start with the area being Indian Territory. Before the area was settled by pioneers heading west, this was Indian Territory, and the Algonquins were the first inhabitants. Next was the Illinois and the Potawatomis and the Kickapoo. In 1905, a human skeleton with an Indian pipe was found 5 feet underground, about 2 miles west of Mount Auburn. The remains are located in the Illinois State Museum in Springfield. And that brings me to the Hunter Cemetery. Along the Mount Auburn Road are a handful of small cemeteries which bear some history. One of those is the Hunter Cemetery, which is just north of the road, about 2 or 3 miles before you get to Mount Auburn, heading west. The Herald and Review reported the funeral and burial of Mrs. Alice Henderson in the Hunter Cemetery in 1886, but there are graves which well predate her grave. Samuel Whiteside was born in 1783, and he was buried in 1866, the year after the end of the Civil War. Whiteside's uncle fought in the Revolutionary War. Whiteside himself commanded a company of mounted infantry with the Illinois militia in the War of 1812.
I'm right.
Is that Gary?
Somebody needs to mute.
Yeah, he does.
Whiteside has been a brigadier general in the Black Hawk War. The Black Hawk War was a conflict between the United States and Native Americans in 1832 in Illinois and Michigan, and Abraham Lincoln saw brief military service. And Whiteside served on a commission that selected Springfield as the new state capital after it had started in Vandalia. Orlena Thaxton was buried in the cemetery in 1849, Felix Davidson in 1861, Elizabeth Denton, 1871, William Lorton, buried in 1874, Martha Hunter, was buried in 1854 and William Hunter buried in 1857. So you can get a good sense that this area was inhabited by settlers in the 40 or 50 years prior to the Civil War. And tonight we're going to talk about much of the history of the area. I'm going to turn it over to Steve Huss.
The beginning of the Mount Auburn Road starts with the history of the road, and the road actually extends from Bulldog Crossing, which is where the Norfolk and Southern Railroad tracks cross at Route 48, and that intersection on the way to Taylorville, just south of town. The history starts with the development of the National Road. In 1800, Congress approved construction of the first interstate highway from Washington, D.C. to Wheeling, West Virginia. During the next 40 years, it was extended across Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois. The Paris-Springfield Road was one of the first Illinois roads in 1826. The Illinois legislature had asked that certain roads be made, and this was one of the very first. This road joined the National Road in Terre Haute, Indiana. The old road is noted, the old Springfield Paris Road is noted by signage at Sand Creek Conservation Area. The original dirt road is there and links to the Mount Gilead Road. So if you've ever walked the trails at Sand Creek Conservation Center, you will see some signage that will direct you to the Paris-Springfield Road. Thomas Lincoln and Abraham and the extended family, as they entered Illinois in 1830, left the Paris-Springfield Road, going north in Decatur, starting at the intersection of the Shelbyville Road. Think Route 51. The intersection of the Shelbyville Road with the Paris-Springfield Road was where they turned north, and then they went a few more miles northwest of Decatur and settled at the current Lincoln Memorial Homestead site on the Sangamon River. Mount Auburn Road is known as Macon County Highway 28, also known as the Mount Auburn Blacktop, and it crosses 3 counties, including Macon, Christian, and Sangamon. It is acknowledged that the roads were known as Crow Line roads, and some believe that none of the originals correspond exactly with the hard roads of today. Eventually, a law was passed requiring section line roads. The history of Mount Auburn Road and Abraham Lincoln is intertwined. When the single Abraham Lincoln moved to Illinois in March of 1830, he and the family squatted on the Sangamon Riverside at the current Lincoln Trail Homestead State Park, which is a mile approximately from the Mount Auburn Road. This was not dedicated as a state park until 1957, the state seemingly ignoring its historical connection to Abraham Lincoln this close to Decatur. The statue by Frank Torrey on Milliken's lawn in front of Schilling Hall is inscripted with, "At 21, I came to Illinois." The original cabin disappeared after 1865. The Lincolns were there from 1830 through the winter and into 1831, and then they left. But the cabin was disassembled at some point and was moved around and reassembled and put on display. But as far as history is concerned, nobody has any awareness of where it was after 1865. There was a replica that was built thanks to the Kiwanis Club. This replica of the Lincoln cabin was made possible by the Kiwanis Club donation in 1975. Have you put that picture up yet of the replica cabin? These are just images you're seeing of Mount Auburn Road. And that's one of my favorites. It's an aerial I took the other day. Stop right there. Go back to that one. That's a pastoral scene that was found in the 1874 plat book of Macon County, which shows the Guy Cottle Farm on Mount Auburn Road. Okay, go ahead. There's the cabin. Now, that was the replica cabin that started in about 1975. But some young people put a fire in the fireplace, and the fireplace was not meant to be functional, and it set it on fire, and it burned to the ground in 1989. I do remember that place. I remember going in it. It was just a nice replica. Abe Lincoln met William Warnick. Just hold it right there for a minute. He was Macon County's first sheriff. Now, Macon County, as well as Decatur, was established in 1829. William Warnick and Abraham Lincoln became friends. William Warnick, in his lifetime, had 2 different wives and 11 children. I looked up the word, it's kind of a cool word. He was philoprogenitive, which means he fathered many children, and kind of a cool word. I've never used it before. The legend is that Lincoln plunged through the Sangamon River ice while he was walking to the Warnick cabin. That was a 3-mile walk, and he decided to continue rather than go back to his place, and he experienced frostbite. He spent 3 weeks in the Warnick home being nursed by Mrs. Warnick. This home was very close to the Mt Auburn Road. It was just on the south side. The Warnicks lived on the south side of the road until 1833, when Warnick bought land on the other side of the road and built one of the more elaborate log cabins in the area. It was initially used as a stagecoach house as well as a residence for the Warnicks. The house was also known as the 8-mile and the 33-mile house because of those respective distances from Decatur and Springfield. In the year 1843, John Eckel, who owned a substantial amount of land right there on Mt Auburn Road, near a road which is called Peru, and near a road which is called Nevada, which are perpendicular to the out west of town, he bought it after Warnick had suffered financial reverses. This picture here shows that drawing of the Warnick Tavern was also used for commercial purposes too, such as the Linen Scruggs ad here, Linen Scruggs being the department store where the Decatur Mental Health Facility is downtown now, and at one time was Squiggle Furniture after it was Linen Scruggs. Ironically, Sheriff Warnick lost the property, lost the tavern in a sheriff's sale. Lincoln was involved in several cases with Warnick over the years, some of them personal and some of them because of his duties as sheriff. Mr. Eckel added a 1.5-story addition to the west end and a 1-story addition on the north side. He added the front porch and 8 pillars, and 3 dormers were added. This is a drawing, a painting done. This is an employee in 1947 at the library, and this painting was in the library at one time. I don't know. I guess we'd have to ask Becky if there is such a thing there at this time. The original log structure, this is the yellow actually depicts the Mt Auburn Road in the vicinity of the Warnick cabin, but there'll be a better shot and demonstration of where the Warnick Tavern was. Go on and show some of the, okay, this actually shows an aerial of the Mt Auburn Road, and where you see the road take a jog. This is approximately 3 miles west of Bulldog Junction, where you see the road in the picture take a jog, and right exactly in the very center of the whole picture is about where the Warnick, right about there is where the Warnick Tavern was located. The original structure was covered with siding. You can show us some of the pictures of it now, and you can go past that one. Well, no, you can't see it well enough. Sorry, I should have blown that one up. Here's another image. This is the area where the road was next. And this is the curve where the road jogs, and just to the right would be where the Warnick Tavern was before you go down to a lower elevation where a creek goes through. Next. There is a one post right there that looked very dated, and there was a entryway off of the road into a farm field, and I suspect that could be the entrance to where the tavern was. Next. And then you can just show a series of these pictures of the tavern. And remember, you're not looking at the log structure that it originally was. You're looking at the Eccles modification of it, the dormers, the addition on the left and the addition on the back. I remember this quite well, and I think Chris will give us a memory, share his memory of that place at some point tonight. And on July 28, 1975, an application was filed in Springfield for a listing in the National Register as an historical site. The planned restoration to make it a Lincoln Associated shrine evaporated when it was consumed by fire that very day, July 28, 1975. No one was charged with the fire, but it very well could have been an arson. It is believed, but not proved, that Lincoln stayed there while riding the 8th Judicial Circuit. And go on ahead and show a few more photos now. This is William Warnick's grave at that Huddleston Cemetery, which as the crow flies is probably no more than a half a mile from where the Warnick Tavern was. And he was buried there, and it's a very well taken care of cemetery that you would only know where it is because of that little sign that you showed a little bit ago called the Huddleston Cemetery. And that's a Huddleston grave right there. This is an aerial view of the cemetery. The house, the white structure on the house, the outbuilding, just this side of it, you can see some tombstones. And that is very well manicured. The fire occurred in 75, and go ahead and show some of Lee Slider's photos. These photos are by Lee Slider, which shows the original log structure after all of the siding was burned away. And very ornate mortise joints, well done structure, all logs, all local logs. That's kind of interesting. There, of course, was a lot more woodland out there at the time. There's Lee Slider in an old photo before it burned. And additional photos of his before. Okay, now hold that for just a little bit. Lincoln was admitted to the bar in 1837 and rode the 8th Judicial Circuit. This is a photo of the 8th Judicial Circuit. Lincoln rode the circuit from 1837 to 1860, less the years 1847 and 48 when he was in Congress. The Illinois counties were organized into circuits by the legislature. The number of counties in each circuit would change depending on the population. The 8th Circuit consisted of 14 counties or 10,000 square miles, or the land surface area of 2 Connecticuts. Each spring and each fall, court was held in consecutive weeks for a week or less. Springfield was the exception, where the fall term was 2 weeks long. The lawyers and the judge would go county by county, generally by horseback, but in later years, apparently with the railroads coming in, there was an opportunity to take some railroad transportation. Each time they went, it lasted 11 weeks. That's twice a year, and also more than 400 miles of travel. Most of the lawyers rode only a portion of the circuit, but Lincoln was one of the few to ride this entire circuit. And it is believed strongly that he did spend quite a bit of time in the Warnick Tavern. The Lincoln Marking Association. Go on and show us a couple of more shots. There, hold that right there. That thing by the red post looks like a chess piece. And this is on Mount Auburn Road at the intersection of Meridian Road. The Lincoln Marking Association next gets credit for its extensive research over several years identifying the circuit roads. Some roads have been moved due to human settlement and land ownership. Old roads were often diagonal and got shifted to follow section lines. The association, the Marking Association, used an 1844 map and communication with local sources. So from 1921 to 23 next, and this one I found by chance probably in the 70s. And as you drive down Mount Auburn Road, it's a very good chance you would never see this thing. But of course I stopped and looked at it and studied it. And it's got a nice inscription on it detailing that this was the route for the 8th Circuit that Abraham Lincoln rode on. They're about 8 feet tall, and they're composed of 3 parts. The base has 2 plates next. The base has 2 plates, and it's oriented in such a way that Macon County, and this one is on the left, and the plate on the right says Christian County. These markers cost about $800 100 years ago, and they're all rural. The one at Mount Auburn and Meridian Road is likely missed by most people. Several years ago, there was a count done, and of the 19 markers, there were 15 that were left. I have known of the one here, but once I found another one in the 80s on Route 1 south of Danville near a town called Ridge Farm. And I thought that was unique, and I never really explored why it was exactly the same as the one on Mount Auburn Road. All right, next. Oh, I want to say something about that. Go back. If you also, besides the rural road markers, the county line markers, were these county seat markers. It's the same inscription. It's a similar image, but not the same image. And this particular one I found in different texts was on Pine Street by the James Milliken Homestead. But then I found also that it really was on West Main Street, and it may have been moved. I think it was. This one is right at the southeast corner of the James Milliken Homestead property, but it's on West Main Street. Next. And there's a nice description of the 8th Circuit and Lincoln's travels, et cetera, on that. So that's the end of my explanation about the road.
Okay, Chris, you want to talk about the river and the bridges?
Well, the Sangamon River parallels the road that we're concerned with here, the whole distance that we're talking about. And there are a succession of bridges across the river. And let's see. The first one we come to would be was there ever a bridge over, did Dipper Lane ever go across does anybody know?
I don't
Was
know
there ever a
that.
bridge there?
I don't know that.
Okay, well, the next thing we've got is the Weichels Road Bridge, which was constructed in the early 60s. And it's moving on west, we end up at Saddle Trek Road, which now this is a picture of the Bolivar Bridge, which was 1902, 1901, 1902. And this bridge it's the oldest existing bridge on the whole route. It's not open to traffic anymore, but it's still there and well worth a look if you want to go down there and have a gander. We got ahead of ourselves. They're still trying to save this bridge as far as I know, but it's in pretty rough shape. Before we get to this though, we've got the Saddle Trek Road Bridge, which was north of the Mt Auburn Road, there were 3 bridges on it. The northernmost went right across the Sangamon. That road's been closed for quite some time, and I don't think there's any access to it at all at this point in time. Moving on to the west, you've got the 4 Bridges Road, which it's marked. It's County Highway number 13. And when I first discovered it, it had 4 iron bridges that were not as long as this, but it's similar in construction. They've all been replaced, and the southernmost was the one across the Sangamon, and the road was rerouted to the east, maybe a third of a mile, a quarter of a mile. So that's much different now than it was. Yeah, continuing on to the west, there was a bridge they called the High Bridge, and it earned its, hold on a minute here. Yes, there it is, the Mount Auburn Bridge. The approaches to this bridge were about a mile high, and heaven help you if you approached it quickly, because somebody might be on the bridge coming from the other direction. I've been across it in a car many a time. It ended up collapsing. The road at the time was still open, but they punched a new highway through from Illiopolis to Mount Auburn, a little further to the west. But this was the end of the High Bridge. They never fixed it, and you can't even get to it. Gary and I have been down there and tried to find it, and you can't even see where it was. So it met a sad end. So moving on to the west, there is currently a highway between Illiopolis and Mount Auburn that was not there until the late 60s. It's the one that took the place of the High Bridge. Now the picture we're showing here, this is like if you turned off of Illinois 48 and headed west on the Mount Auburn Road, this bridge is the first bridge across any waterway that you come to. It's not across the Sangamon, but it is a bridge that's on the road. So, yeah. Which we've got the Bolivar Bridge, which we saw a picture of, and moving further. Oh gosh. I left out the Lincoln Memorial Bridge, which is right south of the Lincoln Homestead Park. And that's been there quite some time too. I don't know when it was constructed, but it's one way across the river. Moving away from the Bolivar Bridge, the next one is the Roby Bridge, which is not far off, not far north of the highway. And if you want to go further west to Buckhart, you can turn and go across the river again. This road is underwater about half the time. Anytime the river goes up, that road is impassable, but it's interesting to go down there and drive across it. The bridge has been replaced from, it used to be an iron bridge much like this, but it's been replaced since. Now, let's see, this is the swinging bridge. I have personally set foot on this bridge in the late 1960s, but it was at night and the bridge was exceptionally rickety and spongy, and I didn't venture out onto it. And I don't know how long it's been gone, but it's been gone a long time. And it was quite a topic of conversation when I was in high school. So there it is. Always just a walkway. You never drove across it, but you can. Now, the Sangamon River itself, in the 1800s, a river or a stream was a means of transportation if it could be navigated, and the Sangamon was always difficult. In the earlier days of Abraham Lincoln, there was a steamboat that traveled from Decatur all the way to Sangamon County. The captain of the steamboat was not accompanied by his wife, but rather by a notorious courtesan from a larger river town, perhaps St. Louis. Lincoln helped clear the path of the river, and it was reported that Lincoln's first entrance into Sangamon County was by canoe on the Sangamon River. After the Civil War, there was a drainage district proposed that would stretch from Smith's Mill in Christian County to Harristown Township in Macon County. Smith's Mill has been gone a long time because the river was rerouted from the area that it was in, and that was the end of that. At any rate, there was a dam at Smith's Mill, and as part of the proposal, it was to be removed. In 1919, the Mueller Company considered the purchase of land along the southern banks of the Sangamon River to build a factory, as they needed a source of water for a factory. Let us remember that prior to 1920, there was no Lake Decatur, and the Sangamon River meandered through Decatur and Macon County, going downstream towards Springfield. In fact, in the 20s, there was a construction of the North Fork Drainage Channel, which was a widening and straightening of a 24-mile section of the Sangamon River from the Niantic Bridge to the Bolivar Bridge in Christian County. The excavating of this channel was to be done by dredge boats, which would start from two different points and eventually join. From what I understand, it ended up mostly being dug by hand, which I'm sure was quite a project. The dredging of the river became quite a controversy between the residents of Sangamon County and those of Macon County. It was the plan of the city of Decatur to use the river for sewage disposal. The people of Sangamon County had intended to use the river for drinking water, and so they objected, and there was lawsuit after lawsuit. And by the end of the 1920s, this project was pretty much abandoned. Comments?
Okay, Steve, why don't you talk about the railroad?
There was actually a rail line that paralleled Mount Auburn Road. And I became aware of that when I lived out on Mount Auburn Road for a short time back in the late 70s. It was the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad. The railroad starts at Booty. It actually, the B&O traverses Ohio, Indiana, and comes through the Staley complex. And then on Wabash tracks, it then went down to Booty. And then when it got to Booty, it then diverted onto its own tracks to go to Springfield, and then diverted and went on to Beardstown beyond that. Now go back one, and that is the B&O Railroad Station. That is the Booty grain elevator, and the depot is on the right, and that grain elevator still stands. So show the picture I took the other day. And so the elevator stands as it did in that old photo, and this metal utility box right there on the right side is approximately where the depot was. Go ahead. Originally, the Indianapolis, you keep it there just a little bit. The Indianapolis, the railroad originally was called the Indianapolis, Decatur, and Western Railway, and later the B&O, and it served the following towns and a couple others I probably left out. It was served Booty and Blackland, which was more or less a grain elevator and a house or two. Osbernville served Mount Auburn. It served Bolivar. The correct pronunciation from locals is either Bolivar or Bolivar, not Bolivia. It also served Roby, and there you may have that depot at Roby. You can show it in when I talk about Roby. And then it also went from Buckhart, Rochester, Springfield, and then it branched off to the northwest to Beardstown. The 1903 plat map shows it, and this is the 1978 map. So go ahead and see if you can find the, okay, just stop there. When I lived out on Mt Auburn Road, occasionally I would hear a train, and it seemed to me like you never heard a train. So I was curious, and I went out there and I looked, and here's the B&O track bed around Blackland and Osbernville, somewhere in between. And show the next one too. It's a wintry scene. And I believe on the very far left, there's a grain elevator on the left, which is the Blackland elevator, and long gone now. But this road was in terrible condition. I never saw a train going any faster than about 10 miles an hour. The spikes were coming out of the ties. The tracks were warped. You could see them move tremendously as the cars went over the tracks. So that's why they kept their roadbed speed down so much. The route was constructed in the 1870s, but became part of the B&O system. Now that's a 1941 aerial that shows in yellow the B&O trackies going through the town of Bolivar, splitting Bolivar in half. And I'll show a better picture of that in a little bit. The B&O announced plans to abandon this system in the mid-70s. And they were not allowed to because a short line railroad was going to take over, but failed to do so due to the cost. Now hold that in a second, I'll explain that picture. All of the tracks were pulled up in 1984. The line did offer passenger service and had two stops a day between Decatur and Springfield, and I don't know when that was discontinued, but by 1946, the B&O was only moving freight on this line. The electric interurban system, which was throughout central Illinois, including Decatur, and went past Milliken's campus and all throughout Decatur, was offered superior passenger service. And so therefore the B&O could not really compete for passengers on this rail. They were on this railroad line. In 1963, there was a Herald Review story of 13 cars that were derailed. In this picture here, this was taken just a couple of days ago. It shows a house at the point where Blackland was. If you take Lincoln Memorial Highway that goes to Lincoln Homestead and take it due south, it will cross right here at this point. And my car is actually on the extension of Lincoln Memorial Road, so I'm looking to the west. The power lines basically follow the route of the old rail line. Next. Okay, now that's the same house, but that row of trees actually parallel is on the old roadbed for the railroad. Next. And the red is the rail route itself. And the incidents that happened were 13 cars were derailed in Osbernville in 1963. Hold that picture. And then in 1977, there were 2 locomotives that got stuck in massive snowdrifts that they said were 6 feet high at the Blackland elevator. And they were stuck for a few days. It was a train about 24 cars long. This is a photo that shows Bolivar, and you can see the collection of trees there, and there's an extension of trees on the old railroad right-of-way. So Bolivar was split by the railroad tracks. Okay, you can stop there and I'll talk about that later when I talk about the towns. Okay. Am I supposed to do that now? Okay. Gary, are you going to do Mount Auburn and Buckhart?
Yes, I'm going to start about Mount Auburn.
Okay.
The small village of Mount Auburn remains.
Gary?
Yes,
Pause for a second. Here's a couple more train pictures.
thank you.
Okay.
All right. Okay. So the small village of Mount Auburn, as we know it today, remains on a hill overlooking the Mt. Auburn Road. But this village has a storied and interesting history. Mt. Auburn was in the conversation for the state capital of Illinois when it was decided to move it from Vandalia and before it was settled in Springfield. A man by the name of Zimri Auger, who came from Connecticut, opened the first farm in close proximity of Mount Auburn in 1839. And by 1855, James Sanders was operating a mill on what is now known as Mount Auburn. A school and a church followed shortly. The Nichols Hotel stood in Mount Auburn by the 1830s, and Abraham Lincoln stayed there in 1834. In 1839, Lincoln succeeded in passing a bill authorizing the survey and platting of Mount Auburn. I looked for a picture of this Nichols Hotel and I was never able to find it, but there's a sign in Mount Auburn that still shows the location of where the hotel stood. A man by the name of Martin Hinkle ran the Stagecoach House just west of Mount Auburn, which was the stagecoach stop from Terre Haute to Quincy. The Stagecoach House was built in the late 1830s and it stood until 1902. By the turn of the century, the railroad came to Mount Auburn and they had 4 stops a day at times, which provided a means to get to Decatur and Springfield. One after another, stores and businesses opened in Mount Auburn. The town had stores, taverns, restaurants, and shops. They even had an opera house where in 1907, a professor explained that, and here's a little article that was in the Decatur paper. If you see, a professor, Lewis Williams, was demonstrating the science of electricity, they said, with complete apparatus at the opera house. So they also had an opera house back then. And you should note that Mount Auburn didn't have electricity for another 11 years. That's my dog, sorry. At one time, Mount Auburn had 3 gas stations, 2 grocery stores, a lumber yard, a hardware store, 2 restaurants, a funeral home, a farm equipment dealer, a blacksmith, a tavern, a doctor, a bank, a drugstore, a newspaper, and a grain elevator. Dr. J.B. Matthew opened his medical practice there in 1875. And here's something that's interesting. There was a car dealership opened in 1918 on Arch Street, which was renamed Main Street, and it was operated by a man who's in this picture here. His name was Emory Bailey, and he continued operating that dealership for 40 years until 1958. Mr. Bailey passed away in the 1980s. The Mount Auburn Community High School began classes with 22 students and 2 instructors in I believe it was in the late around 1919, and they built the high school in 1926. That building was demolished in 1992. Folks around Mount Auburn all are familiar with a fire that happened on Broad Street in 1922, and that fire burned, I believe it was 9 businesses and at least 1 residential home. There was a reconstruction done of that. You're going to notice in this picture here, we're seeing that there was a bakery in Mount Auburn as well. The Morganville picnic, which was started in 1887, was moved to Mount Auburn in 1919, and I believe is still an annual event in Mount Auburn. I'd like to thank the Village of Mount Auburn. I'd like to thank the Historical Museum of Christian County and the Genealogical Society of Christian County as well for some of their input into that research. I want to talk just briefly about Buckhart. Buckhart is a small town located to the west. The Buckhart Tavern is located there. It was opened in 1940 and it remains open. It's a very good watering hole today. There's a shuffleboard table there, and it's rumored that it was previously situated in a tavern across the street, but that tavern caught fire and the local patrons of the tavern carried the shuffleboard table across the street, and it remains at the Buckhart Tavern. Marilyn Carpenter ran the tavern for about 30 years, and she has recently sold the place. If you go in there today, you'll notice there's a lot of dandy things hanging on the walls and ceiling, and it's a little bit of history inside the place. I've learned that when you go in there, the seats located, the bar is a U-shaped bar, and if you go in there, the seats on the right side of the U-shaped bar are pretty much reserved for the locals. And if you go in there on the last Sunday of the month, the Wolf Creek boys are usually playing, and I can guarantee you this, it's usually a packed house. So now you know a little bit about Buckhart too. Steve, it's up to you.
I'm going to talk about these 3 towns, Bolivar, Osbernville, and Roby. The town pronounced Bolivar. I actually know someone who claimed Bolivar as her hometown. Bolivar was established in 1879. One reference noted it was called Bakersville until 1904, when a colonel named Baker started a town from a settlement, and that lasted a short time before it became Bolivar. Currently, it is just south of the Blacktop and has a few houses, and it was split in half by the B&O track, as I noted on previous photos. It was one of the train stops for the B&O. There was a 1976 interview in the Herald Review of one of its natives recounting how things were in 1924 in Bolivar. And this native recalled 2 grain elevators, a grocery store, a barber shop, a dance hall, pool hall, restaurant, and gas station. Next photo. Keep going. It's the one with the gas station. Yeah, okay. Go back to the left one more, just before that, Yeah, and I showed you that before, but that's Bolivar with the train tracks going through it, or the road bed as it used to be going through it. Next. I found this gas station many years ago, and it seemed like at that time it had 59 cents on the rollover price. But now, when I found it again, took this picture recently, I can't see the number anymore, so I don't remember. It's kind of cool, worn out old place. Next. This looks like it could have been a grocery store with an open front, some kind of market. Next. Hold it on that one right there. Yeah, okay. That's all right. We've already talked about this. That's about all I had to say about Bolivar. It looks like a town that has just a few houses in it anymore. The next town would be Osbernville. And Osbernville was established in 1903 and was originally called Morgansville. Right now, there's about 3 houses, maybe even 4 or 5 houses. It does not even show on a Google map anymore. And obviously, what you're seeing there in this picture, it was much more rambunctious back then compared to now. Currently, the one thing of note in Osbernville is a very large and expanding grain storage facility that's still there. You can just hold it on that and I'll explain the mansion. The Osborne Mansion is a unique structure. And the rumor years ago was that there were two Osborne sisters who were spinsters that lived there, but I don't believe that's a true story, as I'll explain. On that front step, you can't see it in the picture, but it says 1906 on it. And just to the right is one of the largest tulip poplar trees that I've ever seen. This place, when I went to see it, when it was for sale some years ago, and you could walk around the property and go inside, it had a machine shed that had the old system of a steam engine and a large pulley and belts, and the belts drove individual machines like drill presses and bending presses and saws, etc. So everything was powered. There's a huge veranda on this. The property is currently owned by a family who's done a lot of things to it and put up some buildings, and there's a very modern house to the left. This house actually from the road does not look occupied anymore, but it appears to be well maintained on its exterior. In 1929, an Osborne daughter fell, and she was named Frances Baker, and she fractured her hip in 1929. And there were not good ways to take care of hip fractures back then other than rest, and that often led to early death because of pneumonia and ulcers and infection, et cetera, that people succumbed to before antibiotics and proper surgical treatment. Frances Baker also had a sister, and both of these ladies were married and lived in Decatur. And at the time of Frances's death in her obituary, it said that their brother lived in Osbernville, and I just presume that he lived in this stately place in Osbernville. Roby, Illinois. Only thing I had picture-wise, unless you found something else, Melissa, was the B&O Depot in Roby. And it's the first town west of Mount Auburn, Illinois. The B&O passed through it and had a depot there. It was established in 1903, and its population in 1989 was 50. Roby is best known really for an incident that happened in 1997 there, and it's known as Roby Ridge. A lady named Shirley Allen, a former nurse, withstood state and federal officers for 39 days. It was one of the longest single-person standoffs in American history, occurring in 1997. The cost of this encounter was over $1 million, so there was a lot of criticism of law enforcement, both federal and state, for that kind of expense. The issue was this. Her family was trying to get her committed because she would sometimes talk about things and people that weren't there, and they thought that she needed to be committed. There were two sides to this issue, though. She did not think she had a problem, and she felt she was mentally competent, but there were other people who said that the family really wanted to get control of her 2 oil wells and her 47 acres of land. She was surprisingly ready for the assault by law enforcement, though, and she had a bolt-action shotgun, which some say she used once, but others say it was never fired. But she had made a mask of rags and Vaseline to deal with the tear gas that they fired into the house, so she defeated that. She also had makeshift armor of pillows and magazines to defend against the rubber bullets they tried to fire at her. There actually were protesters on her side, and it was a big deal, and it was in the national news at that time. She underwent 6 weeks of commitment, and then it was felt that her rights had been violated and that she did not need to be committed, and she was released on her own recognizance. So that's about all I know about Roby, Illinois. Kind of interesting. So.
Hey, thanks, Steve. Chris has some interesting memories to share about his youth and going up and down the road.
Well, I think you can thank my dad for this. We used to take Sunday drives, and one of our Sunday drives in his 1953 Plymouth Cambridge was out the Mt Auburn Road. And I like to travel, and I was most interested in this. And I remember once we crossed the line from Macon County into Christian County, the road was so bad that we had to turn around and come back. It was terrible, just full of holes. But I was intrigued by this, and I stayed intrigued by it until many years later, when my brother and I, who were always on bicycles, decided we were going to try for Lincoln Homestead Park. And we managed to get out there just fine on old 2-lane 36 out of Decatur and wangling off through the country. And pretty soon that wasn't good enough. And so we decided Mount Auburn would be our next place that we wanted to conquer. So one Saturday we started out and rode all the way from Decatur to Mount Auburn on this road, forgetting to take along water, which by the time we got to Mount Auburn, we were really hoping we could find something. Thank heaven there was a gas station that was open with pop. So that turned out pretty well. Not only that, but one of my close friends, Jim Clausmeyer, Jim approached me one day and said, "Would you like to take an excursion down the river?" Yeah, that sounds like a good idea. So he waited until the river was up in mid-spring, and he had a plastic inflatable boat, and we put in just below the little dam and rode the river all the way to Lincoln Homestead Park and made it. We had a return trip a couple of years later, but that was after the 1974 tornado had torn things up. And I think we were off the river more than we were on it. We had to keep portaging because there were trees down everywhere. But this whole area, if you want a nice drive somewhere, going through beautiful country, picturesque road, good condition, hardly any traffic, I would highly recommend this. This is just a great way, even if you want to go all the way to Rochester and on into Springfield. It's just a nice way to go. So that's pretty much it. And you got any?
Well, I wanted to open it up for anybody that had any other comments or questions, but I just wanted to add this, that the Mount Auburn Road is really a lesson in American history for us, because we can see something about how Central Illinois and America used to be a more rural place. We can see how important the railroad was, and how important the railroad was in particular to some of these smaller towns, and how the smaller towns were able to prosper really in large part because of the railroad. So with that, is there somebody out there that would like to share some thoughts with us?
I would. Can you hear me?
Yes.
My name is Dave Gillock. My father, George Gillock, managed the Osbernville and Mount Auburn grain elevators. We moved to Osbernville in 1957. I lived there a year, and then we moved to Mount Auburn. My brother still lives in the house we grew up in Mount Auburn, and I also helped. I worked for the county rebuild that road. So I find this presentation very, very interesting. I enjoyed it and I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. We appreciate that. Anyone else?
Gary?
Yes.
And I might as well mention the Anti-Horse Thief Association building by Osbernville. And if you're on Mount Auburn Road, you can see a white structure that actually looks like a church. It's off to the south and isn't too far from the Mount Auburn Road. And it used to say ATA and a number on it, like 333 or something like that, which I think was a chapter. And I think this, I didn't find too much on the Anti-Horse Thief Association, but it was founded in Kansas in 1855. And it was a vigilante committee to provide protection against marauders. But it was later diversified into other areas with many chapters. And I did find mention on Facebook that someone chimed in and said they used to have like brownie meetings in there or Girl Scout meetings in there. And I know it's in private hands now because it was offered for sale a few years ago. So I'd be curious if anybody knew anything about it that's listening tonight. The ATA, the Anti-Horse Thief Association.
Steve, I read an article in the Herald and Review back in, I think it's printed in the 1920s or 30s, where the Anti-Horse Thief Association had gotten together a group of people and they went out on a wolf chase, that there was a number of wolves that had been seen out there in the area of the Mt. Auburn Road. And so they got some hounds together, and there was at least 50 guys on horseback that were out looking for these wolves.
Good story.
Yeah.
Good human interest. Can you show, Melissa, can you show that one picture that shows the green line on the plat map, and it shows the curvature of the river that I showed you yesterday? Do you recall that? Are you still on with your photos or not?
I'm trying to find it.
Okay. It's a 1874 plat map, and it's got the very curvy river. And Chris was talking about the North Fork Drainage Project, and the reason was that the smell along the river got so bad from all of Decatur's sewage that another idea about taking the hairpin turns out of the river was to speed up the flow of the river and more or less flush and take away some of this July and August and September sludging of the water in the river. There it is. Okay. This is the yellow is Mt. Auburn Road, and then there's the right angle, the S curve.
I just lost it.
There it is. Okay. So this is 1891. And you can see all the hairpin turns in the river. They're called oxbows, where you have sharp angles, and that really slowed the flow of the river. So I have shown one place where in green, where they would cut across from one oxbow to the other and isolate out that part. And so that was, they made sections of straight lines in the river. Now, do you have that other picture that shows the aerial right there? This is what you just saw on the map. The yellow is the old creek that still is there. It actually used to be the old river, but the red represents the straightened section. Is there one more picture after that that shows an aerial? Yes, that's the same thing. All three pictures are depicting the same thing. Mt. Auburn Road is in the bottom of the picture from left to right, and all the woodland, and then that big curvature right there at the top. See, the river is the more or less straight segment, top third. And then the curvy part is what's left. That's the old section. So if you fly over the farmland all the way out there, you can see isolated oxbows out in the middle of fields that no longer have any connection to the Sangamon River whatsoever. And they actually moved the Sangamon River 1 mile south of Illiopolis. They actually moved it a distance of 1 mile south of Illiopolis to get rid of some of the curvature. So that's it.
Okay, thanks everybody for joining us. We appreciate it. We look forward to doing other presentations. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
So you all know this will be is being recorded and will be available on YouTube probably in the next few days. So if you want to watch it again or you want to let your friends know, we will have it available. Thank you very much.
Thanks.